Okay, I believe all of our participants are being allowed in now. So it is noon. If you guys can hear us, can you say something in the chat for me, please? Just want to make sure that we've got folks active and able to hear what we're saying. Awesome. I see a hand up from Steve Sims. Thank you. Perfect. Well, give us just a second here and we'll go ahead and get started. Got people still getting checked in. Thank you folks for joining. I see we have about 25 folks in here. We'll give it another minute or two and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, I'm showing 12:03, so we'll go ahead and get started with today's NEMT Today Lunch and Learn webinar series. Today we'll be talking about minimizing your insurance pain points. We've got a nice panel of industry experts here. We've got a couple of folks that might join in a little bit later, but we'll go ahead and get started. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Peter Hicks. I'm the Executive Director for NEMTAC. Also on our panel today, we have, we'll start in the top corner, Philip Wright. Would you introduce yourself, please, Philip? Who you're with?
Philip Wright with the Wright Risk Consultants.
Awesome. And how about Stuart Felvey?
Hey guys, Stuart Felvey. I'm with the Hill Group. We're an agency based out of Virginia, primarily up and down the East Coast.
Awesome. And Mike McCann?
Hi, my name's Mike McGann with National State Insurance. I specialize in passenger transportation.
Awesome. And Evan Chambers?
Hey, good afternoon, guys. Evan Chambers with Buyers Right Insurance. I'm based here in Birmingham, Alabama.
Awesome. And Andrew Ryan just joined us. Andy, can you introduce yourself and who you're with?
Yeah, hello everyone. Andy Ryan from Acrisure Insurance. We've been specializing in NEMT insurance for over 20 years. Probably met a lot of you.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys very much for being here. As you can see, we've got a broad range of insurance professionals can share some of their insights about what are truly our pain points in this industry. First up here, we're going to lead off with Mike and talking about insurance overview. Mike, if you would, please.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. So something we wanted to do, as we kind of kicked off things, was talking a little about an insurance overview. It's probably not fair of us to assume that everyone has the same base knowledge on insurance. So my hopes are to kind of give you, a 50,000-foot aerial view on what really insurance is. And in its most simplest form, I mean, the definition of insurance would be coverage by contract in which one party agrees to indemnify or reimburse another for loss that occurred under the terms of the contract. So certain types of insurance, such as automobile insurance, can be required by law. And these laws help protect individuals who are involved in accidents who are not at fault. So what can you do with this risk? You could self-insure it, which is probably not a viable option for most companies. And another option would be to transfer risk, which would effectively be purchasing insurance policy with an insurance carrier. If we looked briefly at who the different, main components or parties are within this purchasing insurance experience, you have the insurance broker who acts on your behalf and works with insurance carriers to provide, a submission in exchange for a potential quote. We have the underwriter who evaluates the risk and exposures of the potential insured and then decides whether or not they want to accept that risk and insure it. You also have the insurance carrier. They're the company that provides the insured financial protection against covered losses. Each insurance company is going to have its own set of underwriting guidelines as well. So the goal of an insurance carrier is to be able to collect enough premium to pay for losses plus their operating expenses. And an insurance company's profitability is measured with a combined operating ratio, or a COR. A COR compares claims costs and expenses up against the premium it collects. In honor of the Masters tournament starting today, a COR is a lot like a golf score. The lower, the better. So a COR higher than 100% implies that insurance carriers' total costs exceed the premium that they've collected, and they're operating at a loss. Conversely, a COR lower than 100 implies that the insurance carrier's total costs were lower than the premiums collected, and they're operating at a profit. I think this will be helpful context as we get into why the insurance costs are so high.
Awesome. Well, an important part of this is kind of knowing what it is or who our audience is today. And looking in the room actively, we've got 33 people that are checking in and many more that'll probably view this from the standpoint of the recording. So let me quick do a poll to give us kind of an idea of who is part of this this group. Let me restart this poll real quick. If you would take a minute here to answer the couple questions here. They're very simple. How many vehicles does your organization have or operate? And then how long have you been in business? Because each one of those questions are going to inform how this panel of experts is able to share information with you. So we're getting some results in here real quick. Appreciate you guys participating and sharing your stats with us here. Got a fair number of responses now, 13 different responses. And 32 folks out there. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and end this and then share this in a way that you guys can see. So it looks like we have 38% of the audience has 11 to 50 vehicles. 33% or 31% has 50 plus. And then of this, 31% of the attendees have 0 to 2 years of experience, and 69%, 9 of them are showing 5+ years. So that should help inform you guys a little bit. Okay. Why are my insurance costs so high? So with that in mind, Stuart, can you give us a kind of an overview of why our insurance costs are so high?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Peter. So it's a question that I think everyone on this panel has probably been asked hundreds of times. Why is my insurance cost what it does? Why is it so expensive? If it's not your number one line item, it's your number two line item. And it's something that we all need to be taking into account. Bear with me here 1 second. All right. So essentially, the insurance costs fall into, and why it costs what it does, fall into two buckets. The first bucket is things that you can't control. You have very little or no control over at all. The second are things that you actually have some degree of control over and can take steps to help mitigate and lower costs. So as it relates to things you can't control, the legal environment of where you live and where you operate has a big effect on your cost. So as an example, if you live and operate in Miami-Dade County and you have a pier in, say, Denver, which has roughly the same size, the cost, assuming same number of vehicles, similar losses, drivers, limits, all that sort of thing, the cost in Miami is going to be more. And the reason it's going to be more is because of the legal environment in Florida and Miami more specifically. It's an incredibly litigious area. If you have a claim, the likelihood that there's going to be a lawyer involved, that there's going to be a large payout is much higher. That's a big part of it, is the legal environment where you are. Florida's a bad faith state, so that plays into it really heavily. There's a couple of areas throughout the country that are far worse than others, but every area has its own set of challenges and can be difficult to work through. Another item that you really can't control are increased loss costs and inflation, right? So right now, medical costs in the United States, more broadly speaking, from about 1962 to 2002, have increased from 5% of GDP to 17% of GDP. The reality is, if there's a claim and somebody goes to the hospital, they have to get a medical procedure, it's going to cost more than it used to. This is just the reality of what's happening. And to compensate for that, insurance companies are having to raise costs. On top of that, simply hiring a lawyer. So if you get into an accident and your insurance company has to hire somebody to defend you, just the process of opening that claim, hiring a lawyer, beginning the investigation costs more than it did just a couple of years ago. Another example would be car values, right? So used cars have been increasing in value. So compared to 2015 to 2019, a used car in 2023 costs roughly 40% more. So if there's a claim, the car's totaled, your insurance company is going to have to pay out more. You can't control that. Parts of vehicles are also up about 24% during the same time. And something else to understand is that you are insured by an insurance carrier. There is a group of other clients that are insured by that company. And to Mike's point, talking about combined ratios, if the overall company is losing money, not necessarily because of what you and your company have done, but if the carrier is losing money on the product, the likelihood is that everyone's going to get some degree of an increase. This is something that I think everybody here on this panel is probably seeing. Even if you performed really well, costs are probably more than they were a year or two ago, because of the fact that the claims for commercial auto, it's typically a loss leader for a lot of carriers. It's a hard class to underwrite, and it can be expensive. Now, there are some things that you can control, and a lot of this really comes back to the claims that you have. But that doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's not just you didn't have a claim one day and you do the next. The reality is that your claims are a product of who you hire, how you onboard them, what training you give them, what tech that's in there, what loss mitigation, we'll get into that later, there is. But yeah, if your hiring practices are not where they should be, and if the folks that you're onboarding, say you've got 3 vehicles that need drivers, they have to be out on the road, and you maybe hire some folks that otherwise you wouldn't have to fill those vehicles and put a body in them, there could be a claim because of that, which would overall, increase your costs the following year. So it's really important that the folks that you hire, not just are acceptable by the insurance company, that's a big part of it, obviously, but that get the onboarding that they need. This goes kind of dovetails with training. Your training program should be something that happens before you onboard someone, while they're an employee, annually, semi-annually after claims. This should be an ongoing process. It's not a once a year or a one-time event. It's something that needs to constantly be evolving. And if you don't have a training program in-house that's yours, I strongly urge you to develop one. You can do that by talking to your peers in the industry, coming to NEMT, the convention, and talking to other folks. They'll be able to bounce ideas off of you. That's a good way to start things. Talk to your insurance agent. They can work with you on that. Talk to your carrier. They can provide some training and loss control as well. And then the other thing would be the tech that's in the car. Obviously, cameras and telematics are a big thing in this industry. It's great to have those in the event of a claim, but really the loss mitigation on that side isn't the biggest thing. It's the training that comes with it. So being able to score your drivers and counsel with them if they're having an issue to prevent a claim before it happens. So really being proactive, and all those things come back and tie to your claims. The fewer claims that you have, the lower the payout, the lower premium you're going to get. But that's all under the understanding that there are things outside of your control that do affect your premium.
Excellent. Anybody else on the panel want to add to what Stuart was saying? Or did he cover it?
Yeah, I think that was very good, Stuart. And Mike could probably, being on the insurance company side of things, can attest to this. But to kind of back up to what insurance is and how it works overall, to Stuart's point, there are some things you can control, and that's your claims. That backs up to, like Stuart was saying, your training, your hiring processes, your MVR checks, cameras, technology, and retraining, right? But also, a lot of you guys on here may be claims free and you see your rates going up. And that's because as insurance companies, when they insure a certain industry overall, NEMT, your ABC transport, well, XYZ transport across town had $1 million claim last year, right? And when that all happens, rates rise for everybody. So insurance companies over the last 10 to 15 years, Mike, you can elaborate, but has just seen these large verdicts every year. And when I say large, I'm talking high 6-figure, 7-figure verdicts. And when that happens, it'll take 20 or 30 years to erase those losses. So when that happens, you can't get that money back on that one NEMT company. So you got to raise rates for everybody. So that's kind of another high level on how insurance works and why rates are going up for everyone. But to Stuart's point, every insurance company out there operates differently. Every insurance company has a wide range of rates, a wide range of discounts. So what can you do to position yourself to get the best rates, the best discounts from each insurance company? And that is to alleviate claims. And to do that, to Stuart's point, is take time to train, take time to hire the right people. I know it's tough out there in the labor market. Hopefully it's shifting back a little bit, but I know there for a while it was tough to find anyone to come in and actually drive and do it consistently for you guys. But it takes time to hire the right people, train them very carefully. It takes time, it takes money, but it will save you in the long run.
Okay. Sounds like it's leading into our next particular topic, which is
Peter, real quick. One kind of quick story. I've got a friend who was involved in a car accident a couple months ago. Unfortunately, he was not injured. He got sideswiped on a highway, but it was pretty alarming. Within 48 hours of that accident happening, he had been contacted by over a dozen attorneys trying to represent him. And so, when we talk about that there's been an increase in plaintiff attorneys being used, like that is absolutely a legitimate concern. And we've seen average claim severity increase because of that. The statistic that Evan was kind of alluding to, I mean, if you look at commercial auto liability results for the property and casualty industry as a whole for the past decade, it has been north of 100% every year. So if you look at the 2022, if the industry was running at 105.4%, that means that every dollar the industry collected in premium, it cost them $1.05 to pay out. So, I mean, these are legitimate concerns that we're kind of seeing, and a lot of it has to do with plaintiff attorneys, driving up the average claim severity.
Excellent. Well, and that's pushing into what are my exposures? And Mike, I think you were going to speak to that and how we can help control some of those exposures and be able to control our costs.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of exposures, that I think NEMT operators are presented with. But if we had to pick maybe a couple of key or significant ones, I think the first ones are going to be motor vehicle accidents. I mean, given the large percentage of passengers that an NEMT operator transport maybe, frail or, in a compromised, condition, even the smallest of motor vehicle accidents can cause significant injury to these passengers, making your business liable. So it really becomes trying to prevent these motor vehicle accidents from happening in the first place. And so I can tell you that we've seen driver tenure and distracted driving both have an adverse impact on loss experience. And so having an effective defensive driving course, with both classroom and behind the wheel elements is critical, and then Stuart kind of hit on it, but using in-vehicle technology such as cameras or telematics, can be a very effective way of having a positive impact on coaching and reducing risky driver behavior before a claim actually occurs. Nothing's going to be able to replace a camera in the vehicle, in the event of a claim. I know cameras can be cost prohibitive, but leveraging some form of telematics would allow you to kind of identify risky driver behavior, and coach it before that claim actually happens. The other big exposure that we wanted to mention was the loading and unloading. So improper wheelchair securement and or passenger securement is another significant exposure out there for an NEMT operation. And, I say this because your driver might have been able to avoid that motor vehicle accident, but the passenger could still become injured from a harsh braking event where they have fallen out of their chair due to not being secured properly. And so, just trying to reinforce using a reputable training program for your passenger and mobility device securement training needs, I think is going to be crucial for, a successful operation.
Absolutely. Anybody else want to add to that?
Go ahead, Andy.
Go ahead.
I'll hop in for a second. Being part of, I consider myself part of the NEMT community, even though I'm not an operator. It's just a huge swath. It's probably 90% of my client base is this industry, and sometimes it feels like everybody's out to get us, right? It feels like you get into an accident, the other party's out to get us. If we get into an accident, sometimes our employees are injured, and most of them are honest and all that kind of stuff, but there's a lot of people that take advantage of the system from a workers' compensation standpoint. So the difficult part about our business is when we get into an accident, it can impact the cost of multiple policies, right? It's not just the auto that gets affected, it's the auto, it's and your workers' compensation as well in a lot of scenarios. So I've never seen an insurance industry as hard as it is now. There's less insurance carriers willing to insure the NEMT industry. The rates are going, usually double-digit increases per year we're seeing right now. So so unfortunately, everybody on this call, from the panel standpoint, none of us make the rates and control the rates from industry. Like if you're a florist right now with a vehicle schedule, you're getting hit with an auto increase. So it just never has been more important to utilize from a company, from an NEMT operator standpoint, utilize everything available to control your risk, because there's a range. There's gonna be a range of insurance, and whether that's going up or down, I always look at my job as we have to make sure that our clients are in the bottom part of that range. So it's so important right now that especially I think Mike was alluding to it earlier with like drivers. It's like since COVID, there's been a driver shortage. We've probably had to put drivers in vehicles with less experience and less driver requirements than we ever had before. I feel like it's getting better, but that's definitely impacted loading unloading claims. I've seen a huge uptick in those type of claims, and that comes down to training. And when insurance companies look at those types of exposures, the loading unloading is the biggest piece that they look at as it's a controllable thing from an operator standpoint. It's getting someone safely into a vehicle that we can control. And so if there's any advice I would give to any operator, those are the ones, control what you can control. And the loading unloading is something that you can 1000% control almost all the time. And if that's done right, it's going to eliminate a lot of these claims. And so from my perspective, the loading unloading is the biggest exposure that you can control right now and utilize every tool possible to do that.
Absolutely. Someone else was going to jump in as well.
Yeah. So echoing what Andy said, that's absolutely right. Loading and unloading is the biggest exposure with NEMT. It really isn't a frequency issue. So it's not like a taxi cab where you've got 100 small $1,500, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 claims. It's these really large claims that can affect you and everyone else for years. And often they really do tie down, or a choice of words, but they come back to the loading and unloading and the proper securement of your passengers. Like these people are frail. Sometimes they're elderly. They can be infirm. The likelihood that somebody in their family is going to get into a lawyer saying, you know, mom got hurt is really, really high. So having your training being an ongoing process is something that's really paramount. And then the other thing I just really quickly want to point out is often companies will think, hey, I put a camera in my car. Do I now get a 10% reduction in cost? The short answer is no. There's not a button that is checked that if you do that, you automatically get this. More and more of these cameras are becoming prerequisites for carriers even to consider you. And for the companies that aren't putting them as prerequisites, it's if you don't have them, you've really got to have the processes and procedures in place to make sure that they aren't as crucial. So really taking advantage of what's in front of you, spending the money on the front end to develop your programs and your tech is a huge thing.
I know.
I want to add just a short deal
Sure.
on the use of the camera. You've got to use those for your training purposes. You've got to check your employees and make sure that you're keeping a record of those employees that you've checked to see if they're securing the wheelchairs properly and loading them properly. All of those things can be caught on camera, and that makes a huge difference in your expense for insurance if you can catch that before there's an accident.
Absolutely. I know from our standpoint, when we've been asked to look at organizations or to assist organizations in developing their programs, we've always advocated for not just front-facing, but rear-facing cameras, and wherever possible for wheelchair-equipped vehicles to have a third camera that can focus on the loading and unloading point of the vehicle. That way you can capture that as the passenger is loaded into the vehicle, and it helps mitigate those claims saying that something happened when it may or may not have. The other thing is, once you've gone through your process of securing your passenger, use some sort of indication that says, yes, I've done all the steps. So your driver actually does something along the lines of a thumbs up, or maybe there's a card that they flash that says, yes, I've done my checks. And that's indicating and recording everything that the driver is responsible for has taken place. Now, that doesn't stop the bad actors, because we have all experienced it where somebody has unfastened something or there's been an equipment failure en route, but it does at least say from point A to point D, all these steps have been done and we are recording it now. Okay. Well, this also kind of leads into our next one. How can I mitigate my costs? So with that, Philip, did you want to speak to that to start off? Ways to mitigate.
Mitigating costs really comes down to looking at all the different things that go into your cost of insurance. So you've got your losses, of course, and that's probably your first thing. And the most important thing is you've got to keep down those losses if you're going to keep down those costs. Location where you're domiciled affects that as well. As Stuart, I think, mentioned that earlier. And your drivers, are you hiring young drivers? Are you hiring old drivers? Are you hiring middle-aged drivers? All of that can affect you when the insurance company looks at those drivers. They're going to look at their driving record, but they're also going to look, is most of this fleet done by very young drivers under 25 years old? Then that's an issue with most insurance companies. And the same thing if you got them where they're too old, and they're going to look at that and say, you've got more people to have accidents and things happen with that. They look at the number of vehicles that you have. Sometimes I have seen where you are right on the edge, where you've got, say you have 5 vehicles, and an insurance company will also, another insurance company might look at it if you have 8 vehicles. And so I've seen it where somebody just had to add 1 vehicle, and that got them to another market, which gave them another opportunity to save money. Be sure and look at the age of your fleet. The age of your fleet makes a difference as well. If you've got a lot of older cars, are they well kept? How many miles do they have? All those things go into what the insurance company is looking at. Another thing that really helps you in mitigating costs is having your story together. If you will help us as agents put together a good story on your business about what you do for claims, what are you doing to hire good drivers, all those things will give us a story to tell the underwriter. And if you can tell a story to them that sounds good, it's going to help. Case in point, I had a customer just a few weeks ago that was non-renewed by a company. And I went back to the company and I said, look, this is a really good operator, and they do this, and this. And so they asked me for more information. I went back and got more information about how they were using their camera system, how they were tracking each. They looked at the footage from the cameras to help them. And we were able to get it back to where the insurance company would look at the account again. And so they rescinded that non-renewal notice. Controls on vehicles, we mentioned the cameras 100 times already, but that's just how important it is, because it does make a difference. The number of runs that you make a difference on your cost of your insurance. Your radius of operation, is there something you can do to look at those long runs and say, are they really paying off for me, or are they hurting me when it comes to my insurance costs? And your gross revenue also affects the cost.
Absolutely. Thank you, Philip. Anybody else want to add to tactics or tips that these providers can use to mitigate their costs?
I'll just mention, I think all operators should feel comfortable asking their insurance broker or insurance carrier what sorts of resources they have available to help with this, with loss prevention. I would say that if any one of those kind of lack expertise on the NEMT class, you might want to consider working with an agency or a carrier that does specialize in your unique exposures. This is a very unique industry for the reasons that we've been kind of talking about. And, I think it'd be very difficult to try and fight this fight without everyone kind of aligned on the same page from, insured, carrier, and agency perspective.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of dovetail with that, Mike. There are carriers out there that will do things like put sublimits on your loading and unloading exposure. So you may not realize it, especially on your GL. The certificate of insurance might say, 1 million, 2 million normal stuff, but there could be a $15,000, $50,000, $200,000 sublimit for the loading and unloading. And I rarely attribute to malice, which can often be attributed to stupidity. And the reality is that, to Mike's point, there's a lot of agents that do a lot of stuff. And if you called me up and asked me to help you with construction risk, I wouldn't be the guy. Every single person on this panel knows what they're doing and can help you with your coverage. What I would suggest you do, if you've got, Joe's Insurance, that's your local guy that does your homeowners and your personal, I'm sure they're nice people. It would be a smart opportunity for you to take your policies, come to somebody that's a specialist in the industry, have them review it and get a second set of eyes on it. Because what you don't want to do is be in a position where you have a catastrophic claim and you thought you had the coverage that you needed, and you don't. I can guarantee you those homeowners that are in California that had their houses burned down weren't worrying about if they paid $1,000 more for insurance. They're worrying about if their policy would respond the right way. And having an agent that can really help you with that is paramount. And it's, again, this is not me stumping for myself. Every single person on this panel can help you. It's more just making sure that you have an industry specialist that knows what they're doing.
One of the things that you guys had mentioned as we were preparing for this webinar was even those gaps in insurance coverage. We were talking about the difference between the auto liability and the general liability, and who's covering the loading and unloading of the vehicle. How can a provider spot whether or not they have those gaps? Is it something they can do on their own, or do they need to talk to somebody?
Good question, Peter. Unfortunately, we probably, Andrew, Stuart, Philip, and myself, we see it across the country. To Stuart's point, a lot of NEMT operators, just get with an insurance agent maybe when they start out. Maybe that insurance agent is a specialist in another industry or just a generalist, but certainly they're not in tune with the NEMT market. Therefore, they just get them the cheapest policy out there and get going. And that's okay to get going, but why pay for insurance if it has holes and gaps and exclusions? So I see that a lot. Exclusions on the PLGL and exclusions on the auto for loading, unloading. And when you have both, guess who's covering that if a loading, unloading event happens, right? So you want to make sure that each auto carrier is different. Each PLGL carrier is different. So there's some auto carriers that sublimit. There's some auto carriers that are silent. There are some auto carriers that exclude it. So you need to understand that stance so that you can appropriately get it covered in the PLGL if you need to. Another thing I wanted to kind of mitigate calls the screen we're on. We all, each one of you guys are different in your NEMT operators. In your services, you offer some stretcher, some just wheelchair, some ambulatory. So one thing that we see a lot across the country is, if NEMT operations are working with nursing homes, a lot of times those clients will come out and, it's all about comfort with them. So they'll be on some sort of pillow or some sort of cushion in their wheelchair. And a lot of times the nursing home staff, they don't think about alerting you guys about this, nor do they probably care. And we all know that that's probably not the best way to transport, because that patient can easily slip out from under the restraints. And so, little things like that, after you've been, a lot of you guys have been in it for a lot of years. Some of you guys may be new to the industry. So there's little things like that to mitigate your risk, making sure and empowering your drivers not to move forward with that transport unless there is no pillow or cushion underneath, because that, they lack trunk support, and they will fall out of that chair if there's any kind of heartbreaking event or, God forbid, an accident. So that's when a small claim turns into a very large claim very quick.
Absolutely. Anything else to add before we go on and address some of these questions? We've had some coming in, but we'll go on and answer those if there's nothing else to add. Mitigating costs. Okay. So some of the questions that we've had put out there, is, will we see a percentage decrease if we inform our broker about defensive driving certifications, monthly in-house trainings, in-house wheelchair certifications, et cetera? And the panelists address the questions directly, but generally, it looks like the response is it can only help. You have to communicate with your broker and your carrier, make sure that they know what you've been doing, how you've been training, help write that story the way Philip had mentioned earlier. And then Stuart had said these are items that you should disclose to your agent because it can be useful to help lower your premiums. There was a question in here, what do you mean by the number of runs you make? And that was referring to the number of trips you're making both per day, per month, per year. And then, that also calculates into how far are you driving as well, because your staff and the time behind the wheel represents those opportunities for incidents to occur. Let's see. PL and GL was another question, and that's professional liability and general liability, just to clarify that terminology. Let's see. We have a couple of open questions here. One is from Sergio. He's operating in Mexico, and he says there's almost no insurance companies there because this type of transport service is new and they don't have experience in how to quote it. Are any of our panelists or any of your organizations working in Mexico, or is that just a completely different market because of it being a different country?
Regulation in Mexico, by and large, is very different from the United States. So a lot of Mexican insurance is government funded. I'm not saying NEMT specifically, as the short answer is I don't know. But broadly speaking, that's what we've seen internationally is really, really challenging.
Gotcha. Okay. So basically a country specific, going to have to kind of do some legwork in order to get that. And unfortunately, it's not an area that we typically cover, but yeah, that'll be its own challenge. Next up, do you guys have something like a checklist of items that we must have in the policy itself? And I think
the answer to that question would be, whoever you talk to on this panel, share a copy of the policies and like a quick review of the policies is, there's a checklist for things that should definitely be included, but for you guys to, the general audience to look at that, sometimes you guys tearing apart insurance policies, it's like the foreign language. So, I think any member on this panel would be more than willing to take a look at people's policies to make sure that you have the right coverages and that everything's included that should be included.
Excellent. Okay. See here, we see in this day in and out that these companies are transporting clients in scooters. So I'm guessing that's referring to that being its own set of risks. Is that an issue for any of you guys as panelists?
I've seen some horrendous claims with scooters. People just, sometimes patients just driving them off the back and right out the back of the vehicle. And it's a hard thing because a lot of times they don't want to get out of their scooters, but we always recommend to our clients that if it's possible, transfer them into a wheelchair, because scooters also have a much smaller base to secure as well. So it doesn't have they're much thinner and longer, so they're harder to secure. So we always, when possible, always try to recommend to our clients to transport them into a wheelchair and use the 6-point guide out when possible.
Okay. Here's another one. So can we refuse transportation if they're sitting on a pillow and it won't conflict with ADA? And Evan, I see, is typing there, but also kind of leading into that.
I think I was the one that mentioned that, and kind of to piggyback on Andrew's statement about scooters. So, and Mike chime in as well, being the insurance company representative here, but every insurance company has their own application, questionnaire, supplemental. You've heard all these terms that they want you guys to complete in order to get a quote and or not get a quote. All of those supplementals ask very similar questions. Scooter being one of them, as Andrew alluded to. Do you guys require patients to transfer from a scooter to a wheelchair before transport? There's a reason all of them ask that. And that's exactly what Andrew was alluding to, is because there's been some really bad claims in these scooters. Every question the insurance company asks, there's a reason behind it. Now they don't ask about pillows. I'm just telling you, there's a lot of claims that I've seen come from these nursing home patients who are obviously not in their finest years, lack trunk support, and if you sit on a pillow, it makes it even more slippery, and makes them even more capable of falling out of that wheelchair due to an unfortunate auto accident or heartbreaking or whatever. So now I say all this to say this needs to be your internal company's protocols. And now I don't know what state you're in, Maria, and certainly I'm not an attorney, but you can check with ADA local laws or whatever. But yeah, no, I have clients who have internal protocols and policies, procedures in place that do not entail transporting clients with pillows. And so I know it's for a comfort thing, but it's a very dangerous thing to do.
Yes, we're currently trying to work with RESNA, who is the standard body for those medical devices, to see if we can get the Department of Justice to give us some clarification, because this is an ongoing issue across the industry. Transporting passengers in scooters has an inherently higher risk, but failing to give them that ability also violates their civil rights under the ADA. So we would really like to have the ADA or have the DOJ make some clarification on that, because as providers, we want to do what's safest for our passengers without violating their rights. We also have to comply with our insurance and our policies and procedures. So it's a really sticky wicket, as it were. But ideally, we'll be able to get some clarity later this year. So we're trying to work with them on that. And if nothing else, we'll submit on our own. But we'd like to get a couple of the standards bodies to weigh in making the request. I see here Mark Crawford is making a statement. They say that they do cross-border insurance coverage for BI drivers in Mexico. They do work in the US and Mexico, and they're based in San Diego. So hopefully that's helpful for our friend there that's based in Mexico. And then a couple of these are just statements. Telematics are key. Yes, I would agree. Telematics are definitely key on that particular one. And then Maria says they were told to have passengers sign a waiver if they refuse to transition from a scooter to a chair. And I think that's going to be based on your organization's policy, whether or not you have them sign a waiver or how you're going to address that individually. Are there any other questions before we wrap this up? Or anything that the panel would like to add that maybe we didn't touch on? I know from our standpoint, we would always encourage each organization to look at your policies and procedures, make sure that they're in line with what your insurance company requires of you as an organization, make sure that your staff understands what your policies and procedures are for passenger securement, for entry and exit of the vehicle, what your safe transportation guidelines are. Do you drive at the speed limit? Is there an over or under allowed? All of those things impact how you look to your insurance companies. A couple of questions just popped in. So this is from Maria again, can we refuse transportation if they're sitting on a pillow and it won't conflict with ADA? I won't say that you can refuse transport and it not conflict with ADA. You can say that it doesn't comply with your policies and procedures. The pillow is not what's protected by ADA. It's transportation in the mobility device, in the scooter. You can't refuse to transport them because they're in those devices. So that's really the answer for that. I would say if your policy is they don't transport with those additional pads that aren't designed for the device that they're in, that's really the answer. But again, policies and procedures have to match. And then Jeremy Ballard asked, what role does WC19 play in insurance premiums? Gentlemen, WC19 or WC19 approved chairs, does that impact your rates?
I believe these are the chairs that kind of fold down into a stretcher type situation like the Brodas. I mean, they're looked at as kind of a hybrid between a stretcher, a gurney, and a wheelchair. And yeah, I mean, all that goes into the underwriting, right? That if you have stretcher transportation, it's a higher exposure than if you have just wheelchairs, a higher exposure than if you have just ambulatory. So that's going to all play a part in it. Quite candidly, I've never been asked that question. I mean, I understand what WC19s are, but I don't know that they in and of themselves have an impact on the insurance cost per se.
Yeah. Hey, Jeremy, good question. And there's a NEMT exhibitor who works for No Lift NEMT out of Vegas. He's a rep for those Broda chairs. They're extremely safe, or a lot safer. And it kind of goes back, I think maybe Stuart kind of touched on it at the beginning. And it's, we get a lot of questions sometimes. Hey, if I spend money on these camera systems, how much is it going to reduce my premium? Or if I do this, how much is it going to reduce my premium? There's some insurance companies out there who do have a set discount or credit, if you will. But a lot of them, at the end of the day, all of this should reduce your premiums over time because they should reduce your amount of claims. And I know that's a kind of a gray area answer, but a lot of insurance companies, you may have WC19 or Broda chairs implemented in your operation, yet you may have had a $750,000 claim last year. They're not going to reduce your premiums, right? So it all kind of comes back to what Mike was talking about, and that's your combined ratio or loss ratio, your claims versus your premiums. So it's hard for us to answer that question without understanding the whole story of your operation. If you have a clean operation, very low claims or no claims, and you have all these good practices, best practices implemented, yes, you should get the best rates out there in the market. But it just all depends. You can do all the right things, have a bad claim, and unfortunately your rates may adversely be affected, even though you're doing all the right things. So, but having those chairs, I know what you're talking about. They should reduce your claims hopefully over time.
Correct. And for those that aren't familiar, most standard wheelchairs fall under the WC18 standard, which does not cover transportation in vehicles. So the standard wheelchair that most of us are familiar with is not certified to be transported in a vehicle. And if you review the documentation, many or most of them will say do not transport in a vehicle, but we do it every day. It's part of what we do. The WC19 chairs have been crash tested to withstand and protect your passenger to a certain extent. So certainly encourage you to look into it. I know that the No Lift folks and Broda themselves will both be present at the conference this year. It's worth spending some time to get to know them and understand how that works in your particular workflow in your market. Let's see. Somebody's getting Mark's contact information. And then there's another statement in here. CTAA past training for motive care told us we could implement the waiver policy as part of our internal policies and procedures. Yeah, that if that's how they're teaching, then that would be appropriate. CTAA's pass wheelchair securement training is one of the education standards that's out there. NEMT also has the advanced mobility device securement. There are a couple of states that have their state-specific wheelchair securement trainings that may be required. So make sure that whatever is required in your market, you're taking the time to look at, review, and implement in your market. Okay. Any other questions or comments? No, we end up focusing a lot on wheelchairs here towards the end, but also just wanted to share some information here. We've got the contact information for our panelists. So here is all of their contact information. These slides and this webinar will be available on our website either late tomorrow or over the weekend, along with the slides, so you can reach directly out and contact any one of the panelists. Definitely want to thank everybody for attending and participating. Another resource that we were able to get for people attending this webinar is a couple of defensive driver trainings. That was something that we had identified as being a gap, that we can always use some additional defensive driving. We've got the TAPCO NEMT driver training that's available there, as well as National Safety Council and Safety Serves defensive driving class there. They do have a discount code there for people that want to attend those. And again, thank you guys very much to our panel for coming out and speaking with us. Hopefully everybody can reach out and make some connections through this. Going to have to do my shameless plug because it's that time of year again. We're starting to open up registrations for our conference coming up this September 8th through the 10th. And we currently have an early bird discount for $600 to attend our conference this year in Glendale, Arizona. So feel free to register for that and join us. We already have a decent number of exhibitors. Our speakers are lining up. We're working on lining out our keynote speaker for the event. So looking forward to that. And last up, please take a look at our new website. We updated the NEMTAC website, added our social media, and you'll find this recording on our social media as well. So if you need to reach out to us, please do. Please reach out to our panelists, Philip Wright, Stuart Felvey, Andrew Ryan, Evan Chambers, Mike McCann. We appreciate all of you. Any last words before we end this? All right. Well, thank you guys very much, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Care.